All right, well, so we are on page 2 of the section 5.1 notes, and the last objective we have in this section is to factor by grouping. So factoring by grouping means usually there are 4 terms, and we try to pair them up so that we can factor something out of both pairs. So number 7 is a good example here. So we notice there are 4 terms. If you think of the first 2 terms, we might be able to factor something out of those 2. And the next 2 terms, we might be able to factor something out of those 2. And then maybe we could continue to look at how to factor. But if you look at all 4 terms, there's nothing that will go into all 4 terms. But if we pair them up with the first 2 and the second 2, I think we can factor something out. So if we just look at the 15 and the 5x, so ask yourself what will go into both of those, and hopefully the number 5 comes to mind. So we factor out a 5. 5 will go into 15 3 times, so put a 3 here. 5 will go into 5x x times, so put an x there. And so we factor something out of the first 2 terms. Now we're going to look at the next 2 terms. Is there something I can factor out of these 2? Well, they both have a y, right? So we can probably factor a y out. But notice that if we factor a y out, we would get a negative 3 plus x. But what we're trying to do really is to get the same expression in parentheses, 3 minus x, not negative 3 plus x. So rather than factoring out a y, let's try to factor out a minus y. If we factor out a negative y, we will be left with a 3 and a minus x. Alright, now, so if you look at this expression, notice there's a 3 minus x here and another 3 minus x here. And so if we think of these 2 items, expressions on either side of the minus sign as single terms, both of those terms have a common factor of 3 minus x. So we can factor out a 3 minus x from both of those, and we're left with a 5 from here and a minus y from over here. And now we are completely factored. That would be our answer. I'll put a box around it. Try to get in the habit of that so you are clear what the answer is. Alright, so if we look at number 8. Again, notice we have 4 terms, and if you look at all 4 terms, there's nothing really we can factor out of all 4 terms. So what I'm going to do is look at the terms 2 at a time. The first 2 terms, let's see, we could factor a 2 out, right? And we could also factor out, it looks like an x, I believe. Yeah. And let's see what that would leave us with. We factor 2x out of 2x squared, that leaves us with an x. And factor a 2x out of 14xy, well, that way we'd have our minus. We have a 7, right? 2 times 7 is 14. We already have an x here, so we don't need to write that x, but we do have a y. So we have x minus 7y. Now if we look at the next 2 terms, let's see what we can factor out of these 2. Let's see, looks like we can factor out a y, right? So plus y times something. Let's see, we'd be left with an x and a minus 7y again. So that's kind of the goal when we factor by grouping. The first step anyway is to try to get the same thing in parentheses in both parts. And then we can think of each of these as groups, and both of those groups have an x minus 7y in common. So we can factor out an x minus 7y from both of those groups, and we'd be left with a 2x from here and a y from there. And so now we are completely factored, and I'm going to put a box around that. That would be our answer. Alright, so let's look at the last one. In fact, why don't you pause the video and try this one on your own, and then I will do it and you can see if you're on the right track. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. Let's see, what can we factor out of both of these? Let's see. Now, there's nothing that will go into both 3 and 2 other than 1, and 1 doesn't really help. This one has an s, but this one doesn't. There's an r squared that will go into both of these terms, right? So let's factor out an r squared. And let's see, what are we left with? So r squared times 3r would give us 3r cubed. And let's see, r squared times 2s would give us our 2r squared s. 2 here. So that's the first two terms. And now let's look at the last two terms. What can we factor out of both of these? Well, again, nothing will go into both 3 and 2. But we do have an s squared that we could take out of both of these terms, I think. So I'm going to write plus s squared. And I have to be careful with my s's. Sometimes I will confuse them with 5, so I'll make sure it's clear that these are s's. So we factor out an s squared, and then what are we left with? Let's see. We have a 3r and a minus 2s. Oh, and what do you know? Look, in parentheses we have the same thing in both parts. So we think of this part as a group and this part as a group, and we factor out the thing that's in parentheses, which in this case is our 3r minus 2s. And what we're left with then is r squared plus s squared. And we are completely factored then. And I'm going to put a big box around that. And we're done. So that's the end of section 5.1. That should give you plenty of examples, I think, to help you get started on the MyLab work that we have for this section. And we'll see you guys in section 5.2 in the next video.